The tropical dawn breaks over Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, February 12, 1943. Steam rises from the coral runway as 24 strange-looking aircraft sit in the humid morning air like giant predatory birds. Their wings bend downward in an unnatural gull shape. Their massive propellers catch the orange light filtering through palm fronds. The sound of the surf breaking against distant coral reefs mingles with the nervous chatter of Marine pilots checking their gear one final time. Major William Gies runs his weathered hand along the wing of his F4U Corsair, feeling the cold metal warm under the rising sun. At 32, he's seen enough combat to know when something is about to change forever. Behind him, First Lieutenant Ken Walsh adjusts his flight helmet with hands that refuse to stay steady. Walsh earned his wings as a private 6 years ago, the hard way, through sheer determination and countless hours of training. But nothing has prepared him for this moment. 25 hours, Walsh mutters to himself, checking his watch. That's all any of them have in these new machines. 25 precious hours of flight time in aircraft that promise to revolutionize air combat. Around him, 23 other Marine pilots face the same terrifying reality. They're about to take untested fighters into combat against an enemy who has ruled Pacific skies for over 3 years. The Japanese Zero has become a legend of invincibility. For 39 months, Japanese pilots have carved through American formations like wolves through sheep. Marines die daily in their obsolete Grumman Wildcats. Brave men in inferior machines, unable to catch the high-altitude bombers that pound Henderson Field every night. The Betty bombers come in fast and high, escorted by Zeros that dance around American fighters like deadly ballet dancers, untouchable and merciless. But today feels different. Today, something new is about to enter the Pacific War. Jisei looks at his men and sees the mixture of excitement and terror in their eyes. These bent-wing birds represent hope, maybe their first real chance to fight the Japanese on equal terms. The Corsair's massive Pratt and Whitney engine produces 2,000 horsepower, nearly double that of their old Wildcats. The whispered promises from test pilots speak of speeds over 400 miles per hour, climb rates that defy belief, and firepower that could shred a Zero in seconds. The question hanging in the humid morning air isn't whether these Marines are ready for the Corsair. The question is whether the Japanese are ready for what's about to hunt them down in the Pacific skies. As the first engines cough to life with thunderous roars that shake the palm trees, no one, not the nervous American pilots, not the confident Japanese aces preparing for another routine day of aerial superiority, understands that this moment will mark the beginning of the end of Japanese air power in the Pacific. The Corsair is about to earn a nickname that will haunt Japanese pilots for the rest of the war, Whistling Death. 3,000 miles north, Japanese naval air pilot First Class Hiroyoshi Nishizawa adjusts his leather-flying helmet in the ready room at Rabaul. At 21, he's already Japan's most feared ace, with 36 confirmed kills painted on the side of his pristine A6M0. His fellow pilots call him the Devil, not for his personality, which remains quietly reserved, but for his supernatural ability to appear from nowhere and send American fighters spinning into the ocean in flames. Nishizawa has reason to feel confident this morning. For 3 years, he and pilots like him have dominated every air battle in the Pacific. The American Wildcats are predictable, slow, and vulnerable. Their pilots are brave but inexperienced, flying machines that turn like freight trains compared to the graceful Zero. The morning briefing promises another routine interception. American bombers heading for Bougainville, escorted by the same obsolete fighters that have provided easy targets for months. The Americans never learn, mutters Warrant Officer Saburo Sakai, adjusting his flight goggles. At 29, Sakai is one of Japan's most experienced pilots, a veteran of the China campaign who has watched American air power grow stronger but never truly dangerous. They send their bombers with the same escort fighters. They refuse to adapt. But Sakai's confidence masks a growing concern that he shares with no one. Japanese pilot training has become increasingly rushed as experienced instructors die in combat. The new pilots arriving at Rabaul have barely 200 flight hours, men who would have been considered unfit for combat just 2 years ago. The Americans, meanwhile, seem to have an endless supply of replacement aircraft and pilots. Still, the Zero remains supreme. Its ability to outmaneuver any American fighter at low speeds has become legendary. Nishizawa can put his Zero through turns that would cause American fighters to stall and fall like stones. The plane's 20mm cannon can tear the wing off a Wildcat with a single well-placed burst. Most importantly, the Zero's incredible range allows Japanese pilots to choose their battles, attacking when conditions favor them, and withdrawing when they don't. What none of the Japanese pilots gathering for the morning mission understand is that their technological advantage is about to evaporate in a matter of minutes. Back at Henderson Field, Ken Walsh struggles into the cockpit of his Corsair, immediately struck by how different everything feels. The seat sits much higher than in his old Wildcat. The engine cowling stretches impossibly far ahead of him. The massive propeller creates a blind spot that makes taxi operations dangerous. He literally cannot see directly in front of the aircraft while on the ground. Engine start procedures, Walsh recites to himself, running through the checklist with sweating palms. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double WASP engine contains 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 9, each cylinder as large as a coffee can. When he hits the starter, the sound is unlike anything he's experienced, a deep, rumbling thunder that seems to shake the entire island. Major G's voice crackles through the radio. "Gentlemen, today we escort Army B-24s to Bougainville. The Japanese will come up to meet us, probably in superior numbers. Our job is simple: protect the bombers and learn what these birds can do in combat." What Gize doesn't say, what he can't say without destroying morale, is that they're essentially test pilots flying experimental aircraft into combat. The Navy rejected the Corsair for carrier operations due to visibility problems and tricky landing characteristics. The Marines received them almost by accident, a consolation prize that might turn into a death trap. As the formation taxis toward the runway, the Corsairs create an otherworldly sound. The air intakes on their massive engines produce a distinctive whistling noise that carries for miles. Marine ground crews have nicknamed it the Whistling Death, but they have no idea how prophetic that name will prove to be. Lieutenant Walsh feels the Corsair's power as he lines up for takeoff. The engine produces so much torque that it tries to pull the aircraft sideways during the takeoff roll. The acceleration is intoxicating and terrifying. Nothing in his experience has prepared him for the raw power pressing him back into his seat as the bent-wing fighter leaps into the tropical sky. Climbing through 10,000 feet, Walsh begins to understand what they've been given. The Corsair climbs like an elevator, reaching altitudes that would take his old Wildcat twice as long to achieve. The controls feel responsive and powerful, the aircraft eager to fight despite its size and weight. But questions gnaw at every pilot in the formation. Will the Corsair's speed advantage overcome its unfamiliarity? Can they master its quirks before meeting Japanese aces who know every trick in aerial combat? Most critically, will their minimal experience in these machines prove fatal when the bullets start flying? As VMF 124 heads north toward Bougainville, Japanese radar operators begin tracking an incoming American formation. The routine report crackles across Japanese radio frequencies. 24 enemy fighters and bombers approaching from the southeast. What the radar operators don't report, what they cannot possibly know, is that the nature of aerial warfare in the Pacific is about to change forever. The engagement begins at 25,000 feet, 40 miles southeast of Bougainville, at exactly 1:47 p.m. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa spots the American formation first, a familiar sight of lumbering B-24 bombers surrounded by escort fighters. But something immediately strikes him as wrong. The escort fighters look different, larger, with wings that bend in an unnatural gull shape. He's never seen anything like them. Unidentified American fighters, he radios to his squadron leader. New type, unknown capabilities. Lieutenant Ken Walsh sees the Japanese Zeros climbing toward them like a swarm of angry hornets. 18 deadly aircraft flown by some of Japan's most experienced pilots. His heart pounds as he realizes this is it, the moment that will determine whether the Corsair is a game changer or an expensive mistake. The Japanese attack comes with textbook precision. Nishizawa leads 6 Zeros in a high-speed diving attack, expecting the American fighters to turn toward them in the predictable defensive maneuver that has cost so many Wildcat pilots their lives. Every Japanese pilot knows the routine. The Americans will try to turn fight, the Zeros will outmaneuver them, and the slaughter will begin. But something incredible happens instead. Major Giza doesn't turn toward the attacking Zeros. Instead, he pushes his Corsair's nose down and accelerates straight ahead. Walsh and the other Marines follow their leader's example. And suddenly, 18 Corsairs are diving away from the Japanese fighters at speeds that defy belief. Nishizawa watches in stunned amazement as the American fighters pull away from his diving Zeros like they're standing still. His Zero, considered the fastest fighter in the Pacific, tops out at 350 miles per hour in a dive. The strange new American fighters are easily doing 450 miles per hour and still accelerating. Impossible, he whispers into his radio. They're too fast. Walsh feels the Corsair's incredible power as they dive past 400 miles per hour. The airframe remains solid and controllable at speeds that would tear apart his old Wildcat. Through his radio, he hears Major Gizi's calm voice. Level out and climb. We're going to show them what boom and zoom tactics look like. The Corsairs level out at 20,000 feet and immediately begin climbing back toward the Japanese formation. The massive Pratt and Whitney engines pull them upward at a rate that leaves the Japanese pilots struggling to comprehend what they're witnessing. In less than 3 minutes, the Marines have regained their altitude advantage and are positioning for their own attack. Saburo Sakai, flying wing position with Nishizawa, feels a cold knot forming in his stomach. In 3 years of combat, he has never seen American fighters that could outclimb a Zero. The new aircraft seem to violate everything he understands about aerial combat. They're large and heavy, yet they climb like rockets. They're single-engine fighters, yet they're faster than anything the Japanese have ever encountered. Attack formation, Gizi calls over the radio. Remember your training. Speed is life. Altitude is life insurance. Use both. The Corsairs attack in pairs, diving from above at devastating speed. Walsh picks out a Zero below him and pushes, his stick forward, feeling the aircraft accelerate past 450 miles per hour. The target grows rapidly in his gun sight, a beautiful, pristine A6M painted in the green and gray camouflage of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At 300 yards, Walsh opens fire with all 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Corsair carries twice the firepower of his old Wildcat, and the effect is immediate and shocking. His first burst tears through the Zero's unarmored fuel tank, and the Japanese fighter disappears in a ball of orange flame so bright it hurts to look at. Got one, Walsh shouts into his radio, pulling up from his attack and climbing back to altitude. The maneuver would have been impossible in a Wildcat. The old fighter lacked the power to regain altitude after a high-speed diving attack. But the Corsair climbs away from the engagement area, like it's rocket-powered. Nishizawa attempts to pursue the American who just shot down his wingman, but his Zero simply cannot match the Corsair's climbing performance. The American fighter pulls away vertically, gaining altitude until it's nothing more than a dot against the blue sky. For the first time in his combat career, Nishizawa feels helpless. The battle becomes a nightmare for the Japanese pilots. Every time they maneuver to attack the bombers, the Corsairs dive on them from above at impossible speeds. The American fighters hit like thunderbolts, firing devastating bursts from their 6 machine guns before climbing back to altitude faster than any Zero can follow. Warrant Officer Tetsuzo Iwamoto, Japan's third highest scoring ace, finds himself in a turning fight with a Corsair pilot who makes a critical mistake. He tries to turn with a more maneuverable Zero. But even this advantage proves temporary. When Iwamoto gets on the American's tail and closes for the kill, the Corsair pilot simply pushes his throttle forward and accelerates straight ahead. The Zero cannot match the American fighter's speed in level flight, and Iwamoto watches his target disappear into the distance. "They won't fight," he radios in frustration. "They refuse to engage properly." But the Japanese pilots are wrong. The Americans aren't refusing to fight. They're fighting smarter. Walsh and his squadron mates are using the Corsair's superior speed and climb rate to dictate the terms of engagement. They attack when they choose, disengage when they want, and never allow the Japanese fighters to use their superior maneuverability advantage. As the battle continues, the psychological impact on the Japanese pilots becomes devastating. For 3 years, they have owned the Pacific skies through superior equipment and training. Now, suddenly, they're facing American fighters that are faster, more powerful, and seemingly invulnerable to their proven tactics. Lieutenant Takeo Okumura, a veteran Zero pilot with 14 kills, lines up behind a Corsair and opens fire with his 20mm cannon. His first burst hits the American fighter squarely in the fuselage, strikes that would cripple or destroy any previous American fighter. But the Corsair absorbs the punishment without visible effect. The aircraft's rugged construction, designed for carrier operations, proves nearly impervious to damage that would be fatal to the lightweight Zero. The American pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 124, feels the cannon shells strike his aircraft but maintains control. His Corsair shudders under the impact but continues flying. In his old Wildcat, those hits would have sent him into the ocean. The Corsair's armor plating and robust design save his life. Hansen rolls his damaged Corsair into a shallow dive and accelerates away from his attacker. Okumura follows, pushing his Zero to maximum speed, but the damaged American fighter still pulls away effortlessly. The Japanese pilot watches helplessly as his target escapes, unable to comprehend how a battle-damaged aircraft can outrun his undamaged Zero. The engagement lasts 18 minutes. When the smoke clears, 7 Japanese fighters have been shot down, including 2 flown by veteran aces. The Americans lose 1 Corsair, not to Japanese fighters, but to ground fire from Bougainville's anti-aircraft guns. The B-24 bombers complete their mission untouched, protected by escorts the Japanese cannot catch or outfight. As the surviving Zeros limp back to Rabaul, the Japanese pilots sit in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about aerial combat has been turned upside down in less than 20 minutes. Nishizawa stares at his fuel gauge and realizes something that chills him to the bone. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, Japanese pilots are afraid of American fighters. The radio reports flooding into Japanese headquarters at Rabaul that evening tell a story that senior officers refuse to believe. New American fighter, unprecedented speed, cannot be engaged. The words seem impossible to experienced commanders who have watched their pilots dominate Pacific skies for 3 years. But Lieutenant Ken Walsh sits in his quarters on Guadalcanal, cleaning his goggles with hands that finally stopped shaking, and knows that everything has changed forever. In 18 minutes of combat, he witnessed the balance of air power shift decisively toward the Americans. The Corsair isn't just a new fighter. It's a revolution in aerial warfare that renders Japanese tactics obsolete overnight. We couldn't catch them. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa confides to Saburo Sakai as they walk across the darkened runway at Rabaul. For the first time in his career, Japan's greatest ace sounds defeated. They decided when to fight and when to run. We couldn't force an engagement on our terms. This psychological transformation proves more devastating than the physical losses. Japanese pilots who once approached every engagement with supreme confidence now face a terrible uncertainty. What if American technology has finally caught up with Japanese skill? The impact ripples through the Pacific War with shocking speed. Within weeks, reports pour in from across the theater of strange new American fighters that refuse to be caught or outmaneuvered. Japanese pilots begin developing what flight surgeons will later recognize as combat fatigue, not from exhaustion, but from the stress of facing an enemy they cannot defeat with proven tactics. Ken Walsh returns to combat 2 months later and shoots down 3 Zeros in a single engagement, becoming the first Corsair ace. His victory represents more than personal achievement. It symbolizes the technological revolution that will carry American forces across the Pacific to Japan itself. The Corsair's success creates a cascading effect that Japanese strategic planners never anticipated. American bomber formations, once vulnerable targets that required massive fighter escorts, now operate with near impunity under Corsair protection. Japanese bases that seem secure behind rings of Zero fighters suddenly become vulnerable to round-the-clock bombing attacks. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, who will later command the famous Black Sheep Squadron, describes the Corsair's impact perfectly. The Japanese had to completely rethink how they fought us. For 3 years, they could count on superior maneuverability to win any engagement. Suddenly, that advantage meant nothing if they couldn't catch us to use it. The statistics tell the story of this technological revolution in stark numbers. Corsair pilots achieve an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft throughout the Pacific War. By 1945, Japanese pilots fear the distinctive whistle of the Corsair's air intake so much that the sound alone causes formations to scatter before American fighters even come into visual range. But the deeper impact extends far beyond tactical victories. The Corsair demonstrates that American industrial might can not only match Japanese innovation, but surpass it decisively. The aircraft represents everything Japan cannot compete with: massive engines requiring rare metals, precision manufacturing demanding advanced industrial techniques, and design philosophies that prioritize pilot survival over aircraft weight. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, the Devil, who once ruled Pacific skies, dies in November 1944. Not in aerial combat, but as a passenger in a transport aircraft shot down by American fighters. His death symbolizes the complete reversal of air power that began with the Corsair's first combat mission. Today, aviation historians recognize February 13, 1943, as the day American forces gained air superiority in the Pacific War. But for the men who lived through that transformation, both American Marines who discovered they finally had the tools to fight back, and Japanese pilots who realized their technological advantage had evaporated, the memory remains intensely personal. The Corsair didn't just change the outcome of battles. It changed the fundamental nature of aerial warfare, proving that superior technology, properly employed, could overcome years of tactical experience and training. In 18 minutes over Bougainville, the age of Japanese air supremacy ended, and American industrial might begin writing the final chapters of the Pacific War. The bent-wing fighters that Marines feared to fly became the instruments of Japanese defeat, whistling death from American skies that would never again belong to the rising sun. Want to see how American industrial might continue to reshape the Pacific War? Check out our video on the Essex-class carriers that brought the fight to Japan's doorstep.